Hi, and welcome to the Gamemode Creative Podcast. I'm Rainboom, and with me is my good friend and co-host Meg. Hi, Meg.
Hello.
How have you been? I mean, honestly, the last time we recorded an episode, I feel like it's been eons, but how have you been?
I have been very, very busy, but I've been doing well.
Well, that's good. Anything exciting you want to report about? You don't have to, don't worry about it.
No, nothing too exciting, just the same old stuff, but it does feel like I've been very busy. Mostly at work. I just feel like work has been very draining. But then when I get home, I always try to do my extra projects that I always try to do, but I've been doing them much slower than what I used to be doing it. At least it seems that way.
Yeah, and even if it is, I mean, I'm sure you're still focusing on good quality content, right? So it's not
I'm trying to.
Any of that slows. I mean, you've been streaming a little bit more lately too, so I've been coming across some really interesting work. So, like what you're currently working on, which I'll leave it to the general public, to you listening, to figure out what it is. But you've got some interesting stuff going on in Minecraft, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. Well, always. There's always multiple things going on in Minecraft, but
that's true.
not enough, but not as much as I would like. Sometimes I feel like even if I'm working on multiple things, I wish I had other things planned or that I was getting ready to start. Because sometimes I feel like right now I'm kind of in this stage where I'm in the middle of a lot of big projects and they're taking a long time. But I would like to insert a few smaller things in between so that I have something to actually post. Because, you know, things just take a long time. But I don't know. I'm pretty patient when it comes to things like that, though. So I'm willing to not post for a few weeks if it means producing something really nice.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and you probably aren't going to post, like, half-built things on your Instagram page or anything.
Oh, and I don't want to rush things either.
Yeah. Or even if you put it as like a story to say, oh, hey, here's something I'm working on, you know. And yeah, I can understand where you might just want to put the final product out there. You know,
have you been up to anything lately?
Well, I mean, you probably know that I've just been doing the city, and that hasn't changed much. Although, as of late, I still haven't really gotten... Well, I mean, I've made some progress in the original city that I started back in, what was it, 2020? And in August, late August, early September.
Was it that long ago?
The date, it's crazy, yeah.
It's almost 2 years.
It's almost 2 years. So I remember from the first year, I know that I had little bits and pieces, almost like mini projects completed, and I had been in the midst of posting them up and slowly trying to add some stuff to my Instagram page, which even now is still not a crazy ton, and I still don't post very often, and I have no problem with that. But I will say, though, that recently, as you know, Meg, but I think if you're listening to this might be new to you, but I decided that I would take it upon myself to restart the city, in a sense, not completely, but just because the scale that I had been building it was what they call player scale. So if you were just roaming around normally without flying or cheats, you could just, everything looked like it fit to the player's perception. But I found that with certain builds that I was wanting to try to add to the city, the consistency with details was starting, the flaws in that were starting to show, because there were some buildings where the windows were huge, like they were massive, but the actual the actual building itself was intended to be small. So it's like things were mismatching, and I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep this up very long, especially for some of the buildings I would have loved to try but haven't gone to yet, but I know they're going to have all this detail. So I took it upon myself and said, you know what, I'm kind of in the mood to give myself a bit of a challenge, but also try to see if I can step up the city to the next level, and that is just bringing the scale up by just a little bit, not too much. So it is no longer player scale now. I did post a couple of sample houses up on my page, but now they basically are... You can still explore them, like I'm still doing interiors, everything is the same, but it's now a little easier to actually plan them. Like I can actually build a proper bathroom, for example, now. So the sink kind of looks a little better, all the fixtures and stuff, as opposed to just using a cauldron and stuff. You know, obviously the drawback is that I can no longer get creative with using the smaller objects in the Minecraft, in the blocks available in Minecraft, like, you know, trying to reinvent how I could use a lever or any of those other smaller blocks. But I found that I'm less bounded by that, so I can actually kind of imagine things up a little better. Like, I know my cars also look a lot better now than they did before, at least from what I've seen. Now, did I actually consider the Old City project done? I would say far from it, because there's a lot of green empty space, and now it's almost like it's fallen into the same boat as every other city project that I've attempted from years past. But this one I think is different because it's the same project, just kind of a rebooted version, because the same buildings, like, I'm just rebuilding the same ones and trying to see if I can make them a little bigger. So
does it feel like you started from scratch? Like, even if you had stuff to start from that you're scaling up, does it feel like you're just starting over?
Oh, hugely. Because the thing is, it's like, I don't even have a piece of land that's terraformed. Like, I started this world with just a completely flat piece of land. Kind of like I started the other, but I haven't done anything to it. I've just been manually terraforming it as I go. So even when I started plotting the first few houses and streets, I still look around and I see the whole sea of green, and then I think, wow, there's all this stuff that I'm still going to have to add in here. This road going to this building, to
it's never
this building.
ending, is it?
It is a never-ending project. It always has been, ever since I started,
Do you think it will ever end or ever be finished?
I highly doubt it, knowing the rate at which I've been building, and especially kind of to your point, because of how busy I also have been too. Like, my work has been ramping up very much. And not only the actual work itself, but just the exhaustion from the commute going home. The one going to, surprisingly, is not bad. Maybe it's just that optimism for a really productive day, but coming home after a work day, it's very draining. So I found that the actual amount of time that I get to really feel productive when I get into the city and build, or even, just any kind of side project that I have, even like stuff to record for my campus radio station, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of all been secondary now, just because I haven't really been in the mood much to really be able to sit down and spend X amount of time on it, just because of the fatigue and the exhaustion. So
let me ask you this then. Have you ever finished a project?
That's a really good question, actually, because
and
if I'm
what
thinking,
we're going to talk about today.
That is an excellent segue, actually, Meg. I figured there was something that I was going to say that probably might help, because I know I can relate to this topic firsthand, just because I don't think I've ever actually finished a macro project. Now, I will put emphasis on macro, because sometimes I might consider, almost like going back to our goals episode, our little objectives. I think we were talking about my city there briefly, but sometimes I consider a house as a project, for example, or one building in the city, or one neighborhood. So if we're talking projects of that size, then yes, I have been able to. Now, have I finished them to the level that is like 100% complete, at least in my eyes? Maybe not. Might have been 90, 95, but I've just called it a day and said, hey, as long as this building has 4 walls and a roof, or basically doesn't look like it's structurally unstable, then it should be okay. So
that's
in that
interesting.
sense, yeah.
That's interesting that you would split it up that way, because I always think of dividing, let's say if I were doing a city, which I am doing a city in survival, but underwater. Not nearly as big as yours, but still, I would consider the project as a whole to be one project. So even getting a single building or an area done, I don't consider that like finishing a project. I don't consider them their own projects. I consider the thing as a whole a project. However, I do consider it an accomplishment, or almost like a secondary or sub-task, sub-project thing whenever I put an episode out.
Oh, interesting.
Like, I kind of look at my episodes as like, oh, I can check that off the box. Like, I got one more thing done. Like, it's finished. But the project as a whole is still not finished.
Okay, so kind of like, it's like your progress bar, but set in videos with as like a milestone every time you release it. Well, maybe not like an actual milestone.
Not like a milestone, but yeah, it feels like I've accomplished something just because I'm putting a video out. It's kind of weird, even though the back of my head I'm thinking, but I still have all of this other stuff to do, so that's far from finished.
Yeah, is it now? Because I know the city you're building, though. I guess everything's kind of in the same general area, and Because see, for my case, and the reason why I would consider individual buildings and stuff as little projects is because they in themselves...
Your buildings are very detailed, too.
There's a lot of planning that goes behind each one. So maybe I wouldn't say the houses. Like, if it was for the houses, I'd probably maybe call an entire neighborhood a small project. In that case, then... I'm still in the process of getting that done. But if I were say, like even the buildings I had back in the original city project, the larger ones, those actually did take a lot of planning on paper before I even put them into the city, into Minecraft, and tried building them. So in those cases where I knew I was going to get myself into some kind of planning phase, whether it involved drawing it out, doing some research for inspiration, or anything like that, I figured would basically be considered a project in my eyes. Now, I haven't done videos yet, so that is an interesting way to look at it. Perhaps if ever were to try to document the city progress in
maybe
videos.
Not even specifically videos, but anytime I reach a point in a project where it's post ready, or I'm ready to post it, then I consider it done and complete.
Oh, okay.
But when in terms of that, I guess survival is a bit different, because I feel like survival has a lot of ongoing projects, but you're just breaking it up into smaller stages.
Oh yeah.
Or I guess that is more like just showing the progress as you work on that project. But I never consider it done until I can post it.
Okay.
Well, outside of survival, I should say.
Yeah, fair enough.
Maybe posting on Instagram is my definition of something being done.
True, because again, like going back to you're not usually the sort to put work in progress builds. Obviously with the exception of things like
sometimes
when you're posting
I have done it for some things.
Yeah,
but
that's an example. Like for the carousel, that's one that comes to mind. But even like I guess you could probably consider Evermore as one massive project if you really thought about it in a sense.
Maybe.
But that's like kind of a loose project, because I'm sure you don't really have like an end goal for the whole server overall. Whereas, like, I know in my case with my city project, which could probably also go on for eons, I probably would figure that maybe, basically once I fill up X amount of space, then I'll probably call it a day and say this is the city. But even then, like, I'm sure that if this, in theory, were continuing, X number of years down the road, I'd probably find ways to continue expanding it anyway. So it probably would be a never-ending project.
Oh, let me ask you this. Do you think you should finish a project for the sake of completion, whether that's rushing it or, I don't know, maybe rushing it is the best way to put it. Should you finish it or call it finished just for the sake of getting it done and out there and published? Or should you keep working on it until you consider it quote unquote perfect, even if it isn't perfect, where you just work on it so much that you've run out of ideas to work on it? Do you think one is better than the other, or should we even try to achieve perfection? Should we keep working on something until it's perfect? But is it even possible to reach perfection, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't even know what I'm asking, but I think that is probably the clearest thing.
Interestingly, I do get what you mean. And the reason I mention that is because it, funny enough, also very perfectly aligns to the work that I do in the city. Now, remember how I told you earlier, and this almost kind of goes back to our quality episode, but what I told you earlier in the episode about how I sometimes would just probably put a house, well, I'm just going to take a house as an example and say, I get it, maybe it isn't like 100% furnished or complete, but I'd still just say, hey, I've got all the structural elements, it works, and I'll just call the building done. Now, I guess it really depends on what your intention is, I think, to go back to your question, because if you're going, if you aren't sacrificing your intended quality, or kind of what your intention was of building whatever it is that you're building, or even just with anything, I guess, if we kind of extend this out to content in general, then if you're comfortable with what you have, and even if you maybe might revisit it later and say, oh, maybe I will expand on this, then maybe not be too bad. But I think sometimes what happens is, as you keep doing it more and more, at least what I've found with myself, is that the more you keep doing it, the more you tend to, that percentage of closeness to perfection, or that percent completion, quote unquote, starts to feel smaller and smaller. So it's like, I might start with a house that's, I'd call it 90% done, and then say it's done. Then I build another one some few ways down the road, and it's going to be maybe 80% done, until it comes to the point where maybe I've just done the bare minimum inside. Like, I'm just taking my interiors, for example, and then just have kept calling it a day. So from that point, then, if I were to look back and say, wow, look at all the detail I put in this first house compared to how bare this next house looks like about, X number of periods of time later. So I think it just depends. Like, in that case, it's almost like it becomes draining as you if you just keep accepting something that isn't quote unquote perfect. Now, what exactly is perfection, though? And I think that's something that even, I don't even know for myself, because I just think, in your case,
keep going.
I was just going to say that, like, for me, as long as a house, like the ideal house for me, or ideal build, anything really, is just something that is completely done on the outside and is completely done on the inside, that it looks like if you were just to go walk into it or perceive it somehow, it looks done. It doesn't look bare. Now, I could totally start over decorating this, and that'll be another point we can go on to, but I don't want you to lose your thought. Did you have any thoughts on perfection yourself?
Well, maybe not just on perfection, but this whole topic in general of finishing projects and when should you call something done. I have found that my projects, the more projects I do, the longer they take me, and I think part of that is because I am trying to be being more of a perfectionist with them. I'm trying to be more specific with what I want, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I do think there can be a downside to it if you're just going to be working on it forever and never ever start anything new. I don't know, there's just something nice about, even if you've been working on something for a long time, but it could technically be stopped if you wanted to, but you just are trying to be so perfect with it. But I feel like you could probably be doing yourself a much better favor by starting new projects and learning new things, or I don't know. I feel like doing more projects can be beneficial. I've just known of people who have been working on the same project for years, and there's probably, a lot of people like that. They're working on the same thing for years, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just, I just have to wonder, like, at what point are you going to say this is done and like share it or post it or whatever you're going to do with it? Or are you content just working on it forever?
Yeah.
I feel like I had another thought that I was going to say, and it's just completely slipped my mind. So,
what I will do, just maybe to complement that, is what some people might think then is, if I'm getting sick of a project, but I still want to keep it, I just haven't the ideas right now, then one might think, maybe then I can start another project and then, try to see I can bounce ideas back and forth between things like that. But that also
I get fearful sometimes. What if I start a project and it never gets done because my projects are taking longer and longer and longer?
I mean,
there's always some point where with my projects where I have to be like, okay, it's good enough. I'm not going to get any better. Usually, though, that's when my ideas for it just run completely dry and I'm not feeling any inspiration at all.
Oh, yeah.
I have a limited amount of ideas and inspiration for my builds, and once that's depleted, I'm like, okay, it's done because I can't think of anything else. Even if I'm not happy with it, even if I'm thinking, I know this could be better, but I just can't think of how it could be better, so I'm going to call it done.
Yeah, but before you start to overthink and then start throwing things in that might alter it all of a sudden. Like, I know, imagine if you were... I'm just taking I'll take the carousel back again, because I know there were so many areas that you could have put detailing into, and you did a lot of them, but I'm sure you could have also totally just continued flying around and saying,
I probably could have. I probably could have added a lot more detail.
Yeah, and then you're thinking, but then eventually to the point where you're going, hang on a second, am I adding too much detail or something like that? Or will there ever be closure on the detail I'm trying to add to this, to the carousel?
Yeah, all I'm telling myself is I want to finish it at some point, so I have to sacrifice some detail somewhere.
Yeah. Now the same goes with me with interior decoration, because at the bare minimum, like what I consider my bare minimum is just as long as it has the four walls, the floor, and the ceiling are there, and then maybe you put the glass in the windows, it's fine.
Yeah, for most people, once you have the exterior, it's finished.
But in my case, that's kind of
In
why.
13 chimneys.
Yeah, yes, that's true. That's true. That's the stellar interior that people would love to see. Multi-story. Almost looks like a maze inside the house. That house is still up there, by the way. I'm kind of debating on actually bringing that into the upscaled city too. I totally should. Maybe that
Didn't
might
it
be a
have
fun
like
idea.
a double-decker fireplace or something?
It did.
Yeah.
Main floor, second floor. You could just jump up into the.
I don't know
second
how
one,
you
or-
can stack fires on top of each other, but I do like the concept.
It's an interesting one. I don't know what kind of fireplace magic they might have, but no, it's like, anyway, back to the interior idea though. It's the next step would be maybe I can quote unquote paint the walls by putting a material, a texture there, put the flooring texture and stuff, and then lighting or whatever. And then the next level could be something like, now we'll actually furnish it, put the beds, the cabinetry, whatever, all these little details. But sometimes if I get so caught up in that, I might have one house that has a super decorated bedroom, and then I basically then lose the inspiration for all the other bedrooms just because I've expended all my energy on that one bedroom. So then you look at the house, and I mean, you're not going to see it from the outside unless you look very closely, but you'll see, okay, hey, look, there's this one bedroom that looks really, really well decorated, or at least that's very detailed. I may not put a connotation because somebody might say, oh, those are ugly decorations, so I can't discount that. But then they look in another part of the house, they're going, wow, this is a lot more bare than what I saw on the other side of the house. And it's like in cases like that where I kind of then remind myself to be very careful about how much detail I put into those things just for the sake of consistency. Because again, I don't want to have the end result of varied houses with varied stages of completion all over through the city. Like, I mean, it's a minor detail, sure. And how many
And I'd
people
imagine
will probably...
the more houses you build that are not furnished, the less likely it is you're going to go back and furnish them.
Exactly. Yeah. There have been only maybe one or two times out of the past 3 or some years when I've had a city project where I was completely out of ideas for a new building or a building that was in progress or another project somewhere that I said, oh yeah, let me go back into one of the old buildings and try to see if I can finally finish it. But, I tell myself, I can maybe finally get this done. But every time I do it, I'd maybe make just a little bit of progress, but it still wouldn't end up getting done anyway. Because I also still run dry of inspiration, or just kind of lose that motivation to do it almost, in a sense. Now, not in a negative way. It's just, maybe I've expended all of my mental energy to be able to really put together a quality house. Because, I'm sure you probably feel where you don't want to just haphazardly put something out there and just call it done just for the sake of calling it done. Like in your case,
that's something I was
right?
going to bring up is, what about the opposite end of the spectrum where people are rushing, or it almost appears like they're rushing their build or whatever project it is just to be able to post it within a certain time frame.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, it does depend on what their intent is, like you were saying earlier. If their intent is really just to, if they prioritize getting, let's just use YouTube as an example, if they're going to prioritize getting a video out sooner over making the best thing they could possibly make, then if that's the priority for them, that's what's going to happen. But I'm just so opposite of that I just don't understand it, because I always want to produce the best thing I can make, and just who cares how long it takes, I'm just going to keep working on it. So I've never been able to understand that. Yeah. But
I will say,
know.
though,
I wonder if there's other reasons for doing it other than the one I've stated.
It could be. And I mean, honestly, hey, if you're listening to this and if you have any input of your own too, like, the lines, if you're watching this through YouTube, it's open. You can totally let us know, because I really am curious too. And the reason, what I'd figure, at least from my interactions with people, like, again, I'm gonna use my example of people that, or even the ones that you brought up, that people that don't do interiors and stuff, like, they put, I mean, you put so much detail on the outside that
I'm just not good at interiors.
To levels that I would never think to do on the outside, just or that I could never do on the outside. So then, because I guess it also is just because of, like, kind of the intent of building, right? Because for me, I told myself I haven't seen many builds out there that actually have both exterior and interior equally, and I kind of wanted to create a place that would be, if somebody happened to have access to the world, or whether it's through a save or actually server access to where it's hosted, then they could totally actually, get the full experience of being able to tour the building. Now, for people that I know, if it's mostly from a posting perspective, you probably won't really see the interior of a build anyway, unless you actually post pictures of it as part of the post, or you include recording footage of it as a YouTube video. As an example, let's say, oh yeah, let's walk through this little building that I created or something like that. So, but to those people that might be just looking at only doing the exterior, maybe that to them is already perfection. Like once they haven't even thought about the interior, they're just going, this exterior looks really good. And it's probably very subjective, like much like many of the topics we've been bringing up in this podcast. I think it does lean to be subjective in terms of where that perfection might be. So
I'm still trying to decide if I want to put interiors in my ice castle, but I know that's going to extend the time it's going to take to build by a long time, so I'm not sure. I'm
on the
undecided.
upside, I should be looking forward to more streams then. So then maybe I'll be able,
But see, then I'm conflicted because I want to post it sooner. So when am I going to call it finished?
Put teasers up, just put like a half-finished one.
Well, I mean, the streams are spoiling it enough. I'm practically showing everything in the streams anyway, as it is. And I don't really like spoiling stuff, but streaming, you can't really help it. So.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I do like streaming. I can't just stop streaming.
Then just make it a confidential stream, just by word of mouth. No, I'm just kidding. that defeats the purpose of streaming.
Hardly anyone shows up as it is, so I think it's fine.
just hide the link next time you stream and see how much word of mouth you get from someone saying, oh, hey, look, Meg's streaming her secret work in progress build or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on, again, your perception of where perfection sits. So somebody could be building, like, at least in their opinion, to perfection, and to somebody else it might look like something completely different. But to them, I mean, if they think they're building completely at perfection, then I guess they're achieving it. But maybe it's just me being super critical on myself, perhaps, or sort of like kind of like what you were talking about with your increasingly long build projects and stuff. It's almost like you're setting the bar a little bit higher on yourself almost every time you try to build or start a new project.
I think it comes with, unfortunately, one of the side effects of getting better at building is building just takes much more time and you just spend longer doing it. You'd think it would be the opposite, or you'd get faster at it, but no, the truth is you see more to be done, and then you end up taking much longer working on a single project.
Oh, that's true. No, it's funny. It's like the more you know, the more you actually start looking out for things.
The same is true for anything, for art too.
Yeah.
If you look at professional artists or just anyone creative, you see the amazing work they do, but you have no idea how much time they actually put into doing it.
Oh,
and it kind of blows my mind how much time people spend on something. And you don't think about it. You're just thinking, oh, they're so good, and like they're always producing this art, but you don't think of how many hours it's taken them to make that piece of art.
100%. Like behind the scenes, they're probably, what you might think is simply just a matter of execution and creating whatever art form it is. But really, I'm sure there are a lot of questions that, because they now have the knowledge as a result of experience or maybe from whatever research or inspiration they do, now they've got all these questions to think about. Oh, is this fine? Am I doing something wrong here? And then there's all these questions and considerations.
Yeah, with experience becomes, well, I guess you do get better at critiquing your own work and figuring out solutions. So it just naturally takes longer because you're just getting better at fixing things until you are trying to achieve perfection, but trying to achieve that perfection is going to take more time.
Oh, hugely. And because there's so many more considerations that you're going to be running through in your head. And questions, just because it's no longer simply just, oh yeah, I'll do this. It's now, I'll do this, but da-da-da-da-da-da, and so on and so forth. Like, the example I was going to try to chime in with earlier was, and you can relate to this, at least because you've helped me with it, it's tree building. Same thing there, because now that I've been building trees...
people are always shocked when they realize how long trees actually take to build.
Yeah,
to build them well.
Oh, hugely, regardless of scale. Like, I thought, maybe I'll make a little young tree, and it shouldn't take too long. It should be really quick because it's so small. I was very wrong, because it basically took roughly, it might be a stretch to say this, but it almost took the same time as if I did a somewhat larger tree, at least in my scale. Like not something like, I'm trying to think if you have any projects that incorporate really large trees, but basically, yeah, it's like whether it's anything relatively of the same size, because you have to think about, like, I've been thinking about it more in terms of, do I have enough branch cover? Are the leaves spread out? Are they too dense in areas? Because I know you've taught me how to start getting the eye for spacing out the leaves reasonably, depending on the kind of tree you're looking for. And that process, flying around a tree and plopping leaves down, it's been much slower and a much more not really a meticulous process, but a more calculated. It's more of like I'm on the active lookout for areas where I can see, oh yeah, this doesn't quite feel right, and then there's like adjustments that probably will go. I could fly around the whole tree and come back again and see that it still doesn't look right, and then try to change it up again, that sort of thing. So it's like it's interesting how much more time I spend on my trees now than when I used to. So thank goodness I dropped
because you're
that.
getting better. It's a sign that you're getting better at it.
That's fair. And so I'm glad I dropped that massive tree that I once showed you, which had even like the inner trunk, the bark, and that kind of stuff, right?
Oh, that was a nice tree.
That was an ambitious project because I was trying to.
Did you ever finish it?
No. That's the funny part about it, because I dropped it thinking I need more experience with trees, so I'm going to hold off on this and let me start with smaller trees and then eventually grow into this larger one. But that I'm sure, because not only am I now trying to figure out the leaf positions, I'm actually shaping, because it's big enough that you actually have to shape the trunk a little more. You have to shape all the branches more than simply just putting logs and fence posts or whatever combination you want to use. So I guess I could see now that you mention it that way or put it that way, I guess it is development, like gaining more experience. But then you got the flip side where I could, if I gave up on this, I'd say, oh yeah, I'll start opening up another project. Maybe we'll talk about that, actually. This might be another subject to throw into the whole mix. What happens when you have a bunch of unfinished projects? One thought that I used to think is having multiple open projects would help me bounce back and forth between them. So let's say if I ran out of inspiration for one, I wouldn't be stalled completely. At least I'd have something else I could bounce back to. But then I started to come to find out that, or maybe it's just how I've been doing things, but I've started to come to find out that there have been times when I have had absolutely no inspiration for any of the projects. And then I get the temptation to say, oh, I actually do. I don't have inspiration for any of these, but I'd like to start another project. And then I open up another project, and then the whole cycle comes up to the point where I may get a few done and I may open a few more, but at the end of the day, I'm opening more projects than I am finishing them. So that too is an interesting area to consider when it comes to finishing projects.
I can't remember if we've talked about that in a previous episode, but I feel like we have, where we talked about, or I talked about how I always try to finish projects before starting new ones. Mainly for motivation.
Familiar.
Maybe it was in our motivation.
It might have been that
episode.
But it does feel familiar. I guess we can now talk more on the project-based side as opposed to the motivation side. But yeah, even that honestly is an interesting aspect. I mean, if you're listening and you're somebody who thrives on multiple projects, then I'd love to hear from you, because I really want to know how you do it, since I figure
I thrive on multiple projects. I can't just work on one, but I think my thing is I have too much I want to do. So it's really bad, though, because it does mean working on multiple things are just going to take longer. So that begs the question. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I wasn't. Go ahead. I was just going to say, how do you do it? Well, see, the first thing is you just have to not care how long it takes. If you really want to do them, just go at the best pace you can, and don't get too discouraged, I guess, if you don't finish it as quickly as you would like, because that never happens with me. I never finish things as quickly as I would like. Mm-hmm. And then they always end up taking way longer than I expected them to. I see. But once they are done, it is very rewarding. Oh, yes. Hugely. Honestly, every time, and I think the only places I've ever actually felt that sense of achievement or accomplishment is every time I join a build contest, because those, you have an absolute deadline to finish them, right? So there is no continued extension or expansion. I mean, I'm not good with contests, because I'm always wondering by the time it's over, like, what else could I have done? Yeah. Is this good enough? I always doubt myself. Yeah, the last contest I did, which was about a couple of years ago,
also kind of pushed the time a bit because I was also super busy outside of Minecraft and stuff, that there were many things I wanted to throw in, but I had to settle for whatever I could and just had to really rush and cram it in the last few days left. But then I stepped back, and I eventually appreciated what I had, but I still had that looming thought in the back of my mind going, gee, wouldn't it have been nice if I put this over here, if I did this? And then my mind would start racing. So had it not been a build contest, I would have probably gone in there anyway and tried to implement all those things. And surely I never would have actually called it done or achieved what I considered to be completely done. So actually, I don't even know if I would have known what was completely done. And that's an interesting line to set too. So what's your basis, at least in your case? I mean, obviously, aside from if you start posting on social media, Meg, but do you have some kind of a way of, or do you just go by instinct? Like when you, to indicate when you think something's done?
It's really, like I said earlier, it's when I've completely run dry of ideas and I'm looking at it, can't really think of too much else to add. Even if I desperately want to add more to something, but I still can't think of anything. I just kind of give in and be like, fine, it's done. I can't think of anything else. Even if I look at it and think to myself, it looks awful. But then I post it and everyone loves it, so I guess it's all fine. I just overthink everything.
Well, but so don't overthink everything.
Yeah.
No,
we tell ourselves that every day.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And I mean, like you're not getting people actually telling you this is awful straight up either. So,
no,
it's not
no,
like...
that's what I tell myself.
Unless you want me to go on there and provide some choice criticisms and stuff.
We are our own worst critics.
No. This has been an experience for me to try to figure out how I will finish any of my projects, honestly. I guess what my main takeaways out of this are simply just staying the course and not really, I mean, I guess it depends on if I am bound by a timeline, but just...
It depends on your goals too.
Yeah,
if you're enjoying the process, maybe it'll never be finished, but I mean, if you're enjoying that, I find more enjoyment from actually finishing things, so that's why I always make it a point to finish what I've started. But it really does depend on the individual and what their intention is and what they're finding enjoyment from. Yeah,
I guess though a little more confidence in myself with sort of what my goals actually are and kind of defining them a little more, or something like even just thinking, not worrying too much about what's ahead, or not getting too distracted by the temptation to want to go to try to shift from place to place, because knowing myself, they're pretty impulsive, and I could jump right into something, but then later on find that I might instantly regret it because there wasn't really much ground to cover for a build or something, and then I end up getting stuck in that project limbo that I've been telling you about. But I guess it's just probably being at least sure of yourself and what you do. I guess that might help keep you focused on the project, or at least not so much the focus, but maybe just trying to actually find closure if it's a project that you think you want to get closure on. Now, do all projects need to be finished? I wouldn't think so. I guess again it depends on the project, but
I mean, there have been projects I've started and not finished just because I could see it wasn't going anywhere, but that's not very often. It does happen.
Have you revisited them or sort of told yourself, "Oh, I know this is never going to finish, but it's fun to work on, so I'll do it anyway"?
No, I don't. Usually, if it's ever been something that I've just abandoned, it's because I've barely got anything started. And what I did have started, although there was this one build I did where I got it. It was really simple, so it wasn't like a huge elaborate build, but I did build it all the way, and I just didn't like it, so I didn't post it because I didn't like it at all. It was just me experimenting though with a concept, and I technically finished it, but it just wasn't very good, it just didn't turn out like I was hoping it would.
Or the idea, I guess, didn't really stick much, so you said, I don't know if I really want to continue.
Yeah, it was just an idea. So. Didn't turn out like I expected, so didn't do anything with it.
So at least you managed to achieve separation from it, and you didn't have to worry about coming back to it every once in a while and going, maybe I'll try it again, or let me see if I can do this, or whatever the case is there, But I mean, I definitely love to hear from you listening too, in terms of how you take on or what your thoughts on trying to finish your own projects are, or what you see as perfection. I think this kind of leads to just hearing from you, honestly. I think this is the time that I'd spit out where you can find us feedback-wise, unless you have anything else you wanted to throw in, Meg. But
no, that's it. I think I've finished talking about this topic.
Well, and I probably won't, so I better stop myself before I do. So I'm going to leave the floor open to you listening, because honestly, if there is anything maybe we missed, or some viewpoint that maybe we wouldn't have thought about. I honestly, I mean, when I say actually I mean we, because I'm sure Meg would agree that she'd love to hear from you also. So you can obviously find us on the YouTube version. I mean, if you're listening to this now on YouTube, then there's the comments option. But, we've got our socials as well. Meg's on Instagram. I'm on Instagram. All of our socials are linked up in and around the YouTube, on the Spotify, if you're listening from Spotify. Am I missing anything else, Meg?
I don't think so. That's it. I think we do have links to all our socials, right?
I believe so. Yeah, the descriptions normally should, or at least assuming that when we get this posted, we do it correctly. And we have. At least that's as far as I've seen.
Okay. It's no big deal, though, 'cause
well,
we're really just doing this for fun.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure you'll find us somehow, if it isn't through that in some way, shape, or form, because the world always finds great ways to bring people together in some way, And it's really strange. I could go on a whole tangent on that, but I won't. But yeah, anyways, I think that's about the end of this episode, and I hope you did enjoy whatever conversation we did have. So until the next episode, we will see you then.
Bye.